Hi, thanks for being with me again today. Hope you're keeping well. Today I just want to have a chat with you, really, a conversation about the nature of fear and the impact that fear can have on our faith. It seems to me that nowadays we are living with real heightened senses of fear in the world. If you're old enough to remember the attack on the Twin Towers on 9/11 in 2001, I think really since that date and since that occasion, we might agree that fear has become heightened throughout the world. Nowadays, of course, we've got the global threats, the threat of war in the Middle East. We've got economic threats where world economies are really struggling. We've got the threat of terrorism. So within each one of us, I think there is a heightened sense of fear. And of course, there are heightened personal fears as well. Sometimes related to that, maybe our financial situation is not as strong or as stable now as perhaps it used to be. We might have fears about our health. Going into the future. We might have fears over the nature of our relationships as well. So all sorts of things we might be fearful for the future. I just want to say really that firstly, I don't think that fear is necessarily a bad thing. It's part of our genetic coding. It's part of what makes us human because it helps us to survive, right back to the beginnings of humanity. Fear was a good thing to keep us alert, to keep us aware of our surroundings and key to our survival. So I'm not saying that fear in and of itself is a bad thing, but when fears trap us or disempower us, or rob us of the joy of life, or even worse, rob us of our faith, then obviously we are then talking about a different situation altogether. And when fear gets to that sort of level, then we need to acknowledge that fear is actually a lie. It's taking us away from the joy of the present into an imagined future. And our fears then project into that imagined future that rob us of the joy of the present. I'm currently here in Western Australia, 2 hours south of Perth. Now, if you know me well, you will know that actually it's taken a great deal for me personally to come to Australia because I've got so many fears and phobias about this country. Like many of you, I'm absolutely petrified of spiders. I'm absolutely petrified of snakes as well. So this country kind of plays into those two fears and phobias. But also, when I was 12 years old, a friend of mine, a school friend of mine, came to Australia and he was eaten by a crocodile. They were up in the Northern Territories and he was near a pond or a piece of water anyway. And a crocodile came out and took him, and his body was found 3 days later, rolled and tucked up inside a riverbank. So ever since I was 12, I've had this idea that Australia is a country of death. And, everywhere you go, you're going to get eaten by spiders and snakes and crocodiles. Now, that fear has grown in me over the years, and it took me a long time and a lot of persuasion for me to actually be here in Australia. Now, in one sense, that fear is quite healthy, in as much as it's going to make me aware of my surroundings, and I'm not about to wander off into the bush in my shorts and sandals. But the problem is when that fear becomes a lie and it robs me potentially of the joy of coming to Australia, and if I allowed that fear to rob me on a day-to-day basis while I'm here, and just kind of allow those phobias to take over, then the fear has become a bad thing. Do you see what I mean? So we want to have a healthy amount of fear in life, but not so that it robs us of the joy of the present moment. And I see in my ministry so many people falling away from the Christian faith through fear for the future, because so many Christians interpret their fears for the future, their imagined fears for the future, as a sign of lack of protection from God. And if they think that God is not going to protect them into the future, then they kind of veer in towards self-reliance and try to get through their problems and their situations on their own, and eventually eliminate reliance on God from their lives. So I would say, probably fear, an imagined fear for the future, takes more people away from the faith than anything else in these days. And part of that is because these people misunderstand the nature of God's protection. What does it mean for God to protect us in our lives into the future? Now, to better understand the nature of protection, God's protection, so that we can address our fears for the future, there's probably no better place to go than Psalm 121. It's one of my favourite passages in Scripture. And Psalm 121 was written really about the journey towards Jerusalem when people were making their pilgrimages to the temple for the various festivals. Psalm 121 was written as a reflection of that experience, and journeying towards Jerusalem would have been a very fearful thing to do. They would have to go over rugged terrain to make that journey, going through areas where the bandits were in the hills, and they were quite vulnerable and open to attack. Sorry, I just thought quite vulnerable to attack. So verse 1 is a key verse. It says, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? While they were making their journey towards Jerusalem, they'd be looking around them at the hills as they walked through the valleys. I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? And in verse 2 it says, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. And so the thing is there that they were saying that while they were making their journey, they needed to trust that God was going to be there to protect them as they journeyed. And in the same way, we need to trust that God will protect us as we journey through life. But if we're going to do that, does that mean that bad things will never happen to us? Can we sort of lose all sense of fear because we think that nothing bad is ever going to happen to us? Well, the Bible never says that, and this psalm doesn't say that. God never promises that bad things won't happen to us, because that's the nature of life, isn't it? We do struggle, and we do go through traumas and difficulties in life. But the key to it, I think, is in verse 7. In verse 7 of Psalm 121, it says, the Lord will keep your life. Now that word keep is really interesting, because what it's saying, I think, is that we may go through struggles and difficulties in life, and we may be sort of slightly fearful for the future of what those struggles and difficulties might be. But the Lord will keep your life means that whatever struggles and difficulties we go through in life, they do not have the power to determine our destiny. And fear is the lie that the struggles we go through can actually determine our future identity by suggesting to us that some imagined future will determine our destiny. My fears about coming to Australia were based on a lie that, when I got here, I was going to be bitten by snakes, I was going to be bitten by spiders and possibly eaten by crocodiles. And so this imagined future was based on the lie of these things happening, and that these things would determine my future. Does that make sense? And what Psalm 121 is telling us is that God's power and God's protection is bigger than any struggle you and I may face in the future. Whatever happens to us in the future, God's power and protection is bigger and stronger than it. So therefore, there's a sense in which we can have a healthy fear for the future, i.e., it keeps us alert, it helps us to plan properly, it helps us to be mindful of our circumstances going into the future. But we don't need to endure a fear that is going to rob us of the joy of today and the anticipated joy of tomorrow. And of course, the greatest example of God's protection being greater than any trauma or suffering is Jesus dying on the cross, of course. And Jesus had to go through all the pain and the agony of dying on the cross for us. And no doubt, he had fear going into that. No doubt he went through all those human emotions of anguish, but he knew that God's power and protection was greater than anything he was going to have to endure on the cross. And I think that's why when Jesus died on the cross, amongst his final words, he said, Lord, into your hands I commend my spirit, because he knew that no matter what he was enduring, what he was going through, God's power and protection was bigger. Now, there's this verse, of course, in Romans chapter 6, verse 5, where Paul says, if we've been united with Jesus in a death like his, we will certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. So what Paul is saying there is that Jesus' destiny has become our destiny. Jesus' death has become our death, so Jesus' resurrection will become our resurrection. Now, if Jesus, at his point of death, was able to claim the power and the protection of God, no matter what struggle he was facing at that time, and God protected him and God brought him through it and resurrected him and brought him to glory, then we can be confident that God is going to do exactly the same thing for us as whatever we face in our future. So I would say today then, fear is healthy in as much as we need it for survival, we need it for logical thinking and planning for the future in a sensible way. But fear becomes a lie when it robs us of our confidence, when it robs us of our joy in the present, and when it robs us of the truth of the future. And the truth of the future is that whatever you go through, whatever struggles you may have, whatever difficulties you may have, God's power and God's protection is bigger and stronger than all of that. So if you are feeling fearful for the future today, if you've got fears that you think may be controlling you, in the same way that for me coming to Australia, these fears were controlling me and stopping me coming here and stopping me anticipating a joyful time. If you've got that going on in your life, remember verse 7 of Psalm 121. The Lord will keep your life. No matter what you've got to face in the future, no matter what happens, God's power and God's protection is bigger than anything. So be fearful, be respectful for the building of your future, but don't allow that fear to rob you. Don't allow that fear to become the lie that robs you of joy and faith. I hope that's been helpful. Thanks for being with me today, and I look forward to being with you again really soon. Take care. Bye.